Because I'm pretty sure that whatever podcast is despicable. Because here's what it seems to me to do, and I know the fella's probably going to watch. So I'm going to call it despicable anyway.
Basically.
I hope that they crash and burn
Oh,
or
I found
repent.
it.
These are very fair objections if you haven't given much thought to these shows. So let me give you a series of factors that I believe is contributing to the crisis of masculinity that we are seeing in the modern day. I came across this clip from fellow Australian brother Matt Frad from the Pints with Aquinas YouTube channel, and I thought that I had to give my reaction to this. According to his website, Matt is a Byzantine Catholic and the creator and host of Pints with Aquinas podcast. He's the author and co-author of several books on Does God Exist? A Socratic Dialogue of the 5 Ways of Thomas Aquinas. And the Whatever podcast that he's referring to in this clip is a dating show hosted by Brian Atlas that is a part of the Red Pill space, otherwise referred to the manosphere. And in my opinion, I think the term Red Pill has been bastardized over the years, so I like to refer to it as men's self-help. And this video is kind of an uncomfortable one for me to make because I'm speaking to 2 communities that I greatly respect and 2 communities that I would consider myself somewhat of a part of. And I'm probably going to piss both sides off here, but I really do feel like this is something that needs to be said. I'm going to be speaking to some very difficult truths in a very imperfect way, in the hopes that it will open up a dialogue that I think is very important. Now, let's have a look at the first clip and then I'll give my thoughts afterwards. But just before we get there, guys, I do hope that you take a second to like the video, help to push this message out to a larger audience if you do resonate with what I say. And also, subscribe to the channel, leave me a comment. Let's get back to the clips.
So I agreed to do the Whatever podcast. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Okay, let's just
So
take
we
a
looked it up.
pause.
We couldn't
Okay.
find it.
Because I'm pretty sure that whatever podcast is despicable. Because here's what it seems to me to do, and I know the fella's probably going to watch. So I'm going to call it despicable anyway. It seems like it takes the anger of young men
And directs it at vulnerable women.
Stupid. No, that's too harsh a word.
Just
okay.
vulnerable
Well, no,
women.
vulnerable is too sympathetic.
Okay.
There is like an unintelligent
They're culpable
women that they put on the show with like cleavage.
I am smarter than the hot 18-year-old. We're smart, she's stupid.
That seems to be there.
So some interesting comments here, and this is something that I've been seeing a lot recently. The very religious influencers and YouTube channels tend to have an extreme contempt, as we can see by Matt's visceral reaction here to podcasts like the Whatever podcast and like the Fresh and Fit podcast, and especially the Tate brothers. And my opinion on these 2 movements is just like religion and science. They actually should not be at odds with one another. But we're going to get into that in great detail. On to the next clip.
That seems to be there.
Well, basically, the trope you could say is they take OnlyFans.
Oh, is that what it is?
Girls.
So I got no idea about it. You tell me what it is.
Well, they do. They've done. I think they're kind of figuring themselves out.
I
Basically,
hope that they crash and burn
Oh,
or
I
repent.
found it. You're just not.
So just quickly here, Matt says, I have no idea what it's about. You tell me. And then the next sentence that he says is, I hope they crash and burn. And I think that he'll probably admit that this is not his finest moment. And I've given a lot of thought to what we're seeing with these dating channels and also with religious conservatism and religiosity in the modern world. And I think that what we're seeing is a lot more complicated than that, and it requires a great deal more thought. And I find it frustrating when people are so flippant about these ideas and when they're so quick to put them in the despicables basket. And I just don't think, like I said, that they've thought enough about this. But hopefully this changes that a little bit.
Not in the title.
so I think that there's some people involved with good intentions at the podcast, but it's creating a space where you're having conversations that are not really happening anywhere else on the internet. At least I haven't seen.
Okay.
Maybe that's way too optimistic about it.
Do you agree with my assessment that it takes these women and just makes fun of them, and it just feeds angry men? Who are like,
I think
So what I'm going to first try and do here is steelman Matt's argument to the best of my ability, because this is an argument that I take very seriously. And then after that, I'm going to give a rebuttal or some counter thoughts, if you will. So from what I can tell, Matt's perspective is that the women on these podcasts don't represent an accurate cross-section of the female population, thus putting women in general in a bad light. And this part I don't totally disagree with. I think that they try and get a lot of different girls from a lot of different walks of life to come together and represent very different points of view. But from my observation, the girls that end up on these podcasts tend to lean much more heavily towards the influencer, OnlyFans type of girls. Because ultimately, these are the kinds of girls that want to be on these podcasts to promote their OnlyFans and to promote their social medias. And this is also for entertainment's sake. This is a business after all. And the target audience is obviously going to be mostly men. And anybody who's a content creator knows it's all about capturing attention and then holding that attention. So for this type of content, scantily clad women is going to probably achieve that goal. So you won't get too much pushback from me in that regard. Secondly, though, I think that his perspective is that these podcasts are designed to get unsuspecting, naive sorts of girls who don't really know what they're talking about or what they're getting themselves into to come on the podcast and look stupid for the pleasure of angry, bitter men. Men that just want to blame women for all of their dating misfortunes and for all of the problems with the modern world. All the while, these hosts are projecting this false sense of intelligence by owning these 18-year-old girls who are simply unprepared for the conversations. And these are very fair objections. If you haven't given much thought to these shows and don't see the necessity of the conversations being had. You see, the dating market has changed drastically since the advent of the internet and ultimately social media and dating sites. This graph here demonstrates the rise in online dating and how people are actually meeting each other. And you can see that online dating is becoming by far and away the most common way in which couples get together these days. And down here you can see in 1995 this started to take off, and this is actually the year that the first online dating website was launched in the form of Match.com. Furthermore, you can see at about 2013 it really went to the moon, and this is when Tinder was introduced, and around the 2015 mark it became the number one way that people meet each other. So obviously, this has completely revolutionized the dating market, and we are now in a place where this is completely the norm, and it doesn't look like slowing down anytime soon. So, what impact has this had on the sexes? Well, let's start with females. Firstly, if you are a decent looking female and you're on social media and dating apps, you are undoubtedly getting a fair amount of attention from males. There will be guys all in your DMs and you will have hundreds of matches to choose from on the dating apps, and you can pretty much treat this like a game. Moreover, the sexual marketplace is now globalized. No longer are people limited to their cities. Girls who have a bit of a presence on social media and who are good looking will now have guys from all over the world hitting them up. They'll have rich guys offering to fly them out to Dubai and put them on yachts. That beautiful girl from your town, the one that you could take out to the movies once upon a time, have her home by 8, is now on a yacht in Croatia. And believe me, this is not something that's widely talked about, and it's not something that girls are in a rush to admit, but it is very, very common. Find me a very good looking girl who has a decent presence on social media, and I absolutely guarantee you that she has at least been offered these things, because rich guys want hot girls on their boat. And I know this is an extreme example and it only represents a small part of the female population, but it certainly has a trickle-down effect. An average looking girl is able to embellish her looks and will be receiving attention from guys on social media who would otherwise have been out of her league. Guys that 99% of the time will only want to have sex with her. But unfortunately, they will confuse this attention with retention. They will confuse the attention that they're getting from these guys with blue check marks who are athletes and entertainers with the guys that they could actually retain and that would take them seriously in a long-term relationship. I mean, most likely, these high-status guys are giving that same attention to 50 different girls. So when looking for a long-term partner, women are hypergamous by nature, which means that they tend to look across and up the socioeconomic hierarchy. Just an example, they will rarely settle for a man who earns less than them, and they will rarely settle for a man who's shorter than them. They want a man who is going to satisfy their desire for safety and security. So you can understand that when their standards become inflated, and you have the top 50% of women pursuing the top 10% of men, there's going to be a serious imbalance. And as for men, oftentimes, the mating strategy tends to be more around quantity. So these guys who are the very high status men are going to just want to sleep with lots of these women and not actually settle down with them. Or at least not settle down with them all. Now couple this with the boss babe, yas queen, don't settle queen culture, and the fact that society lies to women and tells them that they are empowered if they sleep around.
I don't cook, I don't clean, but let me tell you, I got this ring.
And that abortion is just healthcare. And then you have girls doing TikToks where they're going to get abortions and putting it on their social medias. And they're being told that career is the most important thing that a woman can possibly do in life. And that there's something inherently wrong with being a mother because, you know, we have too many people on the planet and climate change. We are now heading towards a generation of masculine, single, childless, unhappy, middle-aged career women with hyperinflated standards. This is not a nice thing to say, and it doesn't make me feel good having to say it, but I think that as far as I can tell, and I'm more than happy to be proven wrong, this is just the cold, hard reality. So, how is this dating revolution affecting men? Well, I'm going to get into that in detail quite soon, but what I will say for now is the gap between the haves and the have-nots is greater than ever. As the options become greater for women, they become a lot more scarce for men, which is causing a giant portion of the male population to stack up at the bottom and actually have zero sexual access to women. So, what are the factors contributing to this and what are the answers? I'll get into that soon.
I think it does a lot of that, but I think they also are having real, I mean, they had Michael Knowles on. I mean, he's a guy, he's not a woman, but they had, they're having women on that are not that category of women.
But did they then pit you against these poor girls who've never really thought through these issues to make them look silly?
I felt more, if I was pitted, it was more I was actually debating against this gentleman who was there for the sort of pro-promiscuity route.
Okay.
So I don't know, maybe that was unusual for the podcast because their other episodes don't typically do that. But basically I ended up having a sort of exchange with a guy that is part of that kind of Andrew Tate world. His name's Justin, and he seemed like a very nice guy when I met him, but he basically said on the show that he thinks women should be faithful, but men don't need to be.
How convenient.
But unfortunately, there's these kind of guys, I think it's kind of a growing mantra.
This is actually what effeminate men look like. How do you feel about the word?
You should go on the podcast.
This is what effeminate men look like. Men who, when Aquinas uses the word effeminacy, and I don't know what the Latin is, but he uses it to mean men who do not persevere in what they are called to because it's difficult. Yeah. And it seems to me a man who says, I'm going to sleep around, and that this is manly is an effeminate thing. Well, the sad thing
about it too is like the Andrew Tate presentation is very macho. Right? It's highly macho. It's I don't
know much about it.
I only started learning about it maybe 6 months ago because it's seeping into, I think, some parts of conservatism.
Yeah.
Where I see some conservative commentators praising some of the things that Andrew Tate says because he's just getting more influential, I guess. And then I was like, okay, who's this person that's influencing people? Okay. And then you go look at the stuff that he says and you're like, what is this?
And
like,
what does he say?
It's very misogynistic. Okay. I mean, it's very... And watch, I mean, I'm curious what your folks are going to say, your podcast listeners, but there's a lot of Andrew Tate fans that are very bought into his presentation of manliness. And so they don't like anybody criticizing him because they think people are too highly critical of men in our culture anyways.
Get over it. Like a soft reaction from men. Thursday, am I wrong? I know you're the Gen Z guy, so maybe I'm misinterpreting this. But if you're a dude who can't handle criticism and can't be faithful,
but the reason Andrew Tate is popular is because we are in a society that is blaming all societal ills on men, and he's the only one refusing at all to apologize. And men who feel hurt run to that. I'm not saying it's right, but that's the reason. It's not because they can't take criticism; it's because he's the only one refusing to take any, and they want that.
Okay.
Now, I think his producer was a little bit more on the money there, but still going with the whole young men are turning to Andrew Tate because they're hurt line, which I take issue with, to be frank. Let's have a look at this from a slightly different angle. If you are a man and you go to the gym 3 times a week and keep yourself in decent shape, you earn an $80K salary, and you have a decent amount of charm and charisma, can hold a conversation, then you are most definitely in the top 20% of men. What the hell does that say about the state of men in the modern world? Guys go to Andrew Tate because he is incredibly inspiring. The market has spoken, and he is clearly touching a pain point. He is clearly providing solutions to the problems that many men are having.
Life is ultra competitive, especially for men. It doesn't matter what a government does. It doesn't matter what psyop the Matrix puts on the slave mind. It doesn't matter what they try and convince you of. There's always going to be people who work harder than others, and it's always going to be competitive, and the people who work harder are always going to win. That's the game. So you're either a hard-working person who gets up and does what they're supposed to do regardless of how they feel and performs, or you're not.
He has the ladies, the cars, the money, the status. He's also a legitimate kickboxing world champion, which people tend to forget about. And now he's the renegade bandit, which obviously appeals to young men's sense of rebellious adventure. He is Ned Kelly on the run, and the Australians will get that one. Our modern culture seriously lacks representation in terms of strong, masculine male figures. Who are our heroes? Harry Styles in his dress? Sam Smith, the fish of them?
Yeah, I'd love to be a fish of them.
Will Smith, the simp?
You know, as time went on, I got into a different kind of entanglement. with August. The only person that can give permission in that particular circumstance is myself.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Who is our John McClane, Terminator, Gladiator, Indiana Jones, Shannon Knoll? James Bond is the last one, but he's even woke now. We are a generation that needs help. We need guidance. We have an inner yearning for a bit of tough love and to follow strong male role model figures that we can strive to emulate.
Well, I think it's because they're looking for an identity and their identity is just getting crushed by society. That's what they may feel.
Yeah.
And so Andrew Tate is promising this very masculine identity that doesn't apologize for itself, including its own faults.
See, this is what happens when you don't accept the fall.
Yes, it's
like
true.
we are broken men and women, and Christ wants to heal us so that our desires can be in line with objective reality. And when you don't agree to the fall, or if you don't accept Christ as your savior, you end up justifying sexual sin and normalizing it, like I think Prager did on my show, because what else are you going to do?
Yeah,
But-
it's true. It's true. But I think that the advantage is when you have someone who is at least active in an ideology, period, and they're like online doing stuff, and there's crossover happening where their ideas are being challenged, they'll watch that, which is back to the Whatever podcast, the reason I agreed to go on, because it was like 4 hours. I mean, it was a long
I want you to, I don't
thing.
want to cut you off, but I do just want to insert something real quick. Like, I'm all for open discussions, especially about things that we're not talking about. And obviously there can be merit in that. But the only thing I've seen in this Whatever podcast, and it was like 20 seconds, was these guys who brought on women who didn't know what they were talking about and they made them look stupid. Do you regret being on the show?
I don't.
Did you know what you were walking into?
A little bit, but it was kind of more crazy than I thought it would be. But I think having that opportunity to have that conversation openly, it's in front of anybody who's going to listen and they get millions of views. I think it's awesome.
What bit's awesome?
That people are seeing clearly, because I think the truth wins out in those conversations. People are seeing clearly, okay, evil as evil and good as good.
Okay. Maybe was I too harsh on the podcast?
I think you were a little harsh. I do think you're right that it does. I think there's a tendency to objectify women, but creating a space where conversations happen with people that are radically different,
so
I think there's value to that.
I wish I had said this in the beginning instead of just like shooting off at the hip. But
that's okay.
My understanding of the podcast was they're bringing these women in who don't know at all what they're talking about and making them look like idiots. That was the like 10-second, or maybe I've watched like 2 or 3 clips.
I think
that's what it looked like.
I think they have done some of that.
Which just seemed like, just real quick, that just seemed like a way to throw red meat to men who are frustrated at women in society.
I think that Lila is almost on the money there. I actually agree with what Matt's saying there, but we live in a world where that's not happening. And it doesn't appear as though that's going to happen anytime soon. In fact, I believe we are getting further and further away from that reality. And this is where I think that people get a little bit disenfranchised by the religious creators. They tend to be all the way over here in their worldview. And oftentimes, as we're seeing now, they tend to be very quick to vilify people who aren't on the same wavelength as them. They're very trigger happy when they're describing men who listen to this content as hurt and angry and effeminate, rather than seeing it from the perspective that things are very, very difficult in the modern day for men. And these are places where people are going to seek guidance that they can't get anywhere else. Also, leading men to delete themselves at alarming rates. Boys are conditioned from a young age in the schooling system to act more like girls. Sit down, be quiet, raise your hand when you want to speak, which obviously has its value, but is much more suited to little girls. That's if they're boys at all at this stage, because apparently, in this day and age, you don't assign gender anymore. And if a boy feels like he wants to play with a Barbie doll, suddenly he's a girl. And all of these masculine instincts that little boys have are not instincts, but rather they're social constructs that need to be conditioned out of them from a young age because they're toxic and dangerous.
For me?
Yeah.
Wow.
Don't hold it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Pretty girl. Oh, got you.
Mommy.
That's shit.
In fact, you're taught that any form of assertiveness, roughhousing, aggression, and ambition is a bad thing, and to act more and more like the little girls, because they don't get in trouble from the teachers, so they must be doing the right thing. Growing up, we're bombarded with shows like Simpsons and Family Guy and King of the Hill, where the fathers are all fat, stupid, deadbeat drunks that are subordinate to their wives. And then we're fed the Hollywood narrative that women just want a nice, sweet, kind, compassionate guy. They don't want the jerk on the football team, and if I just buy her flowers and write her a love song, then she'll be mine forever, because that's what happened in the movies, right? And then, most likely, when we're teenagers or maybe even earlier, we'll be introduced to porn, which our developing minds will consume recklessly, because what the hell do we know? We're basically children. And this is absolutely guaranteed to negatively distort the way in which you view women and sex, something that will be entrenched by the time you're in your 20s. And so now you've finished school, you go out into the real world, and you're a meek, rather passive, not very attractive guy that's super in touch with his feelings and very sensitive, like he was told, but then you're still watching all of the alpha chads get all the girls. All the guys that the girls in the movies didn't want. And now you're pissed off and you feel like you've been lied to by society. But maybe at some point you do start sleeping with girls. And oh, how much of a minefield that is in the modern day. Nowadays, many places around the world are adopting these affirmative consent laws, which literally means you have to ask permission every single step along the way, whatever you do. And if you fail to do this, you could end up in the slammer. So then, for that reason, you try and follow these rules, only to realize that nothing quite kills the mood like asking for permission every 30 seconds. And let's call a spade here, even if it makes some people uncomfortable. Women are much more turned on by a man that can take control in a situation, and a man that can be dominant, and I'll leave it at that for the moment, but not forceful. And you have to figure that balance out. So good luck with that. And Bill Burr said it best.
No means no, that's another one. No means no. It's like, no, it doesn't. All right? Look, no means no. No, that means no. All right, but no, stop it. What are you doing? Oh my God. You're being so bad. Stop it. No. Yeah, that's not a no. That means I want to do it, but I'm afraid you're going to judge me, so I'm just going to make it look like it was your idea so you don't figure out that I've already performed this act with 40 other people. Right? But then you go to court and you get a bad read and there's some guy reading it. Your Honor, she said no. Stop it. What are you doing? You're being so bad. Yeah, and you're just sitting there like, she didn't say it like that. She didn't say it like that.
But sometimes it doesn't even matter if you do everything right and if you strike that balance. Because in some places you can withdraw consent. You can withdraw consent the next day or maybe a few years down the line when they're rich and famous. So now we have a generation of young men who have absolutely no idea what it means to be a man or how to do it and how to make yourself attractive to the opposite sex. So with all of these factors in mind, where do you think they're going to turn? Well, there are a few options. The first one, they just retreat. It's too hard, they just give up. And there are lots of men who are doing that to the most extreme extent. And it's becoming an epidemic that people don't really want to talk about. But otherwise, they will just live lives of quiet desperation. Why would you want to work your ass off and delay gratification every single day to become a better and more competent man when you can just turn to a life of instant gratification and hedonism? You can live at home with your parents and find friends through games like League of Legends. And every time you want to get off, you can just watch porn. You might even be able to interact with girls online by spending all of your paycheck, all of the little money that you have on their OnlyFans accounts. Plus, the sex dolls will be out soon anyway. And I know what you're thinking. Religion solves all of these problems, right? And I don't actually disagree with you. But from what I can see, there isn't a large-scale mass adoption of religion in the sense that you would have it happening. Young men are looking around them and feeling disenfranchised by the modern world and by woke culture and feeling like everywhere they look, nobody particularly gives a damn about them. They want something that they can latch onto, something that gives them purpose and meaning and direction, something that's a direct antidote to the madness that they're seeing around them. And then they look at the church and they see pride flags and drag queens and woke church leaders apologizing for the history of the church and for traditional views and bending the knee to progressivism. It's very difficult to put your faith into something that doesn't seem to believe its own teachings anymore. But then there's another option.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
For most young men who aren't from a heavily religious background, this movement is going to be incredibly attractive to them because these guys are completely unapologetic about their beliefs. When they hear Andrew Tate speak, he articulates their problems for them in a way that they had not yet comprehended. Life is a competition. You're not where you want to be because you're lazy and you don't put in the work. Women don't want to know from you because you're broke and you're a nobody. Men don't respect you because you're fat and weak. But I have overcome every one of these issues, so follow me and I can show you how you can do the same. And whether you agree with that messaging or not, what you have to understand is that to a red-blooded, testosterone-fueled young men, that is going to be an extremely attractive message. And the way that our modern world is going, they're much more likely to choose that than the religious message of be a virgin until married. To these young men, that sounds about as much fun as a wet blanket. And furthermore, when one reads Rollo Tomasi's Rational Male or watches the Fresh and Fit or the whatever podcast, they will begin to understand a lot more about female nature, and it'll be penny drop after penny drop for them. It'll help them to understand why they're having such a rough time with women and how to increase your sexual market value as a man. And if you do decide to go down this path, then you will be encouraged to go down a path of dramatic and deeply introspective self-improvement. This in regard to finance, fitness, social skills, fashion, status, and more. You honestly can't watch this content for very long without being bombarded by these messages. The fact that there is a masculine burden, and if you feel like you have to have a cry and take a day off every time you are mildly inconvenienced, then that will act as a female repellent. But there is a few very important points to make here. And the first one is that I'm not overly well versed in the whole red pill content. And I would not even know who the majority of them are. I could probably only count the ones that I watch and really respect on one hand. And I've seen a few others briefly that are absolute gold-toothed frauds that are in absolutely no position to tell anybody how to live their lives. So please don't come in the comments with some arbitrary red pill creator who's saying some wild shit and try and say that I'm defending them. Furthermore, if a young man is to watch this content, then it's important to be able to regulate, filter, and compartmentalize what you hear. Don't be just blindly obedient. With these long-form, unfiltered podcasts, there are going to be certain parts that one shouldn't strive to emulate. For me, I like the part where they say go to the gym, fix your finances, learn a little bit about female nature, and how to not be a simp. And I've seen so many examples of where guys have written into these shows saying that they literally talked them off the ledge or they talked them away from the noose. And for me, it's not to that extent, but they definitely helped turn my life around. So for that reason, I'll be forever grateful to these guys. And I'll always defend them and not just turn my back on them because I'm good now. But will I run around incessantly calling girls bitches and hoes? Absolutely not. Do I want 4 wives? No, that sounds like a logistical nightmare to me and not a conversation that I'd ever want to have with my kids. It's very important to be able to discern individuals who are giving advice in good faith and saying, hey, listen, I know things are hard for young men at the moment and probably harder than they've ever been in the dating marketplace. So we have to strive to get our shit together and be the best, most responsible, and ultimately attractive men that we can be. Not just blame women for everything and embrace the spirit of resentment, because then you're just as bad as the feminists. And maybe I'm too optimistic and idealistic, but I trust that most guys will be able to do this. And actually, I'm seeing a lot of examples of guys who are heavily influenced by these podcasts and who are really improving their lives. When I see these shows with 10,000 people in the chat, I don't see 10,000 incels sitting there masturbating to girls getting owned and looking at their OnlyFans, although that definitely would happen, and probably way too much. I see a lot of guys who are trying to improve their situations, be better with women, observe the behaviors of guys that they look up to, and maybe even find themselves a community of like-minded men. And something happened recently that kind of confirmed this for me. Fresh and Fit did a collaboration with Valuetainment where they did a live show, and there was a bunch of girls on the show and the studio was packed out with guys who were fans of the show. So let's have a look at how that went down.
Are you guys okay with the 13,000 plus potentially hundreds of thousands of people that might watch this and learn from a question that you have? Okay. Iron sharpens iron, man. Because you guys might be asking a question that someone at home doesn't have the opportunity to ask. Maybe they don't have the money to be here. Maybe they don't have the opportunity to be here. And you might be asking a question that will save them from putting a gun in their mouth. Real quick, before you ask your question, guys, there's no stupid question, all right? We're all at different points in our life. If they ask a question, I don't want anybody ridiculing anybody that asks a question, because at the end of the day, we're here to make each other better. And it's tough to be a man in 2023, all right?
Shout out to Fresh and Fit. I love you guys. You guys do amazing content. I love that you preach loyalty to your fans as well, which is awesome, something you don't see a lot nowadays.
Show of hands if you're currently in a relationship. Okay.
Stupid.
So half the audience. Show of hands if you're single. Okay. Oh. Now, for all the single dudes out there, raise your hand if you want a girlfriend or a wife or a girl in your life. Show of hands. Okay, so the most of you want a girl in your life.
The way I see it, these guys were all dressed to the nines and they're trying to exude success and self-improvement. It seemed to me like Fresh and Fit were having a positive impact on these men's lives. Now, call me crazy, and maybe people will laugh at me for this, but I actually think that these male self-improvement spaces are a direct conduit to God. Think about it. This movement has embraced religion more and more over time until now. We have Chase on the Whatever podcast, a full-on devout Christian who preaches celibacy and walking with the Lord and constantly says to the chat, say Christ is king, and everyone's in there saying Christ is king. They've also had Michael Knowles on their show, which was easily their best episode. You also have the Tate brothers, who are former atheists who abandoned all of the pimping stuff and who are now extremely religious and inspiring millions of men to follow the same path. There's definitely something happening there, and I think it's worth a closer look. Moreover, a lot of these guys who seek self-help will eventually end up at Jordan Peterson. And when they get there, there is a certain path that's laid out. You might learn a little bit about Carl Jung and archetypes and learning about archetypes of the unconscious mind. And then you'll hear Jordan Peterson telling stories about Pinocchio and about Little Red Riding Hood and about Harry Potter, things that you seriously relate to. And he'll tell you why you relate to those stories so much. And then you'll realize that these stories that they're telling in these cartoons are fundamental archetypal stories. And the most interesting and most fundamental stories are the stories of the Bible. How cool is that? Let me check that out some more. And if you're anything like me, that got me very curious. And then next minute, I'm watching every single piece of content that Ruslan puts out. And then I'm watching Pints with Aquinas. There is enormous emphasis on self-improvement in these communities. And if you pursue that to its logical conclusion, then where do you arrive? When seeking knowledge, what is the ultimate source of wisdom? The Bible, of course. What is the ultimate form of accountability and responsibility? Well, it's the fear of God. When embarking on a journey of self-improvement, what is the ultimate good that you can strive towards? Well, it's to be closer to God and to act more like Jesus. I genuinely do believe that this is the logical conclusion for those who keep digging. And we've seen individuals like the Tate brothers and like Sneeko turn to religion eventually, because in one way or another, they keep on hitting brick walls when trying to confront the problem of degeneracy in our modern world. And ultimately, they give in to the fact that the ultimate antidote to this is religion. So, here's what I propose. Instead of demonizing these podcasts and these audiences that are trying to get answers, maybe it's time to embrace them, time to reach them. And the best way to do that is to come together and to collaborate in good faith. You may be able to speak to hundreds and thousands of men that have never really thought about God, or that maybe haven't had the ideas laid out in any coherent way, as Michael Knowles did so brilliantly when he went on the Whatever podcast. And furthermore, you'll probably have a lot more in common with these people than you think. So, Matt, if you watch this, I appreciate it. I understand that I've stumbled my way through this and I've probably been pretty flawed in my logic from time to time, but I think that this is a conversation that needs to be started. So feel free to respond. And if this is a conversation that you would like to have, then I would be more than happy to discuss these topics on my channel or yours. If you guys want to watch another video, click right here. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.